Directora General Adjunta de Medio Ambiente de la Comisión Europea, señor Director General de Política Financera de la Generalitat, Josep María Sánchez, Director General de la Bolsa de Barcelona, Josep María Antúnez, senyores, senyors, amics, amigues. Buen día, buenos días, good morning. Es un placer para mí, como presidente de la Asociación Barcelona Centre Financer Europeo, daros la bienvenida a todos ustedes en la apertura de esta jornada que conjuntamente con el Instituto de Estudios Financieros, el IEF, hemos organizado con el objetivo de tratar lo más ampliamente posible y en profundidad un tema como son las finanzas sostenibles. Para ello contamos hoy con expertos que nos permitirán conocer la situación actual, iniciativas que se están desarrollando para dinamizar y potenciar su utilización y las previsiones futuras de las finanzas sostenibles, tanto desde el punto de vista de los organismos supranacionales, las instituciones financieras, consultoras e inversores. Antes de pasar la palabra a Josep Solé, director general del IEF, no quiero dejar de expresar mi agradecimiento a todos y cada uno de los ponentes por la disposición mostrada desde el primer momento para participar en este evento, y a la Bolsa por acogernos una vez más en este marco y hacer posible la realización del mismo. Sin más, cedo la palabra a Josep Solé, quien hará una exposición sobre el desarrollo del acto. Moltes mercès per la seva atenció, moltes gràcies por su atención. Thank you for your attention.
Muy buen día, buenos días. Reitero los saludos, los agradecimientos que ha hecho Luis y paso directamente a la presentación de la jornada. Yo creo una jornada muy atractiva. Es un tema que está creciendo de una forma muy importante. Creo que el diseño de la jornada van a ver que tiene una lógica pedagógica importante, que es el objetivo básico que tenemos hoy, salir de la jornada de hoy realmente con un conocimiento bastante más cercano de lo que realmente implica, en estos momentos va a implicar y implicará las finanzas sostenibles y verdes. La estructura de la jornada es que we have the great pleasure to have Joanna Drake here with us. She's Deputy General Director of Environment, I will say coordination of resource efficiency policies and instruments in the DG Environment of the European Commission. He's going to talk about the action plan, the European Commission action plan on financing the sustainable growth and what that action plan will imply strictly for the financial sector. This will be the starting lecture. I have to say that Madam Drake is here in Barcelona also to participate in the Smart Cities Congress. But it's not fair what we did to her, which is she had today 2 more speeches during the morning, but we said you have to have a third speech and the first one even before at 9 o'clock, and we thank you very much for that. I don't think it's in the payroll of the European Commission to work triple in a morning. Thank you very much, Mrs. Drake. Following the intervention of Joanna Drake, we are going to have the first roundtable of the morning, which is Sustainable and Green Finance, Definition, Products Index, and the present situation at Spanish and international level. En este panel vamos a tener yo creo un magnífico elenco de especialistas que provienen tanto de diferentes consultoras. Voy a hacer la presentación un poco más tarde, concretamente de Pricewaterhouse, de Deloitte y de Ernst & Young, y también juntamente con 3 personas que provienen de banca, de la Federación Bancaria Europea, de Bankia y de CaixaBank. Este contraste entre consultoras y entidades financieras yo creo que nos va a permitir que veamos y conozcamos un poco más cuál es su visión sobre lo que implica, qué contiene este concepto todavía un poco vago de la Sustainable and Green Finance. Vamos a hacer un coffee break a las 11 de 20 minutos y después acabaremos la jornada con una intervención de María Leticia de Robert, para que nos hable un poco quizá del el que tradicionalmente es conocido como la plaza financiera quizá con más actividad de finanzas verdes a nivel europeo, que es París. Vamos a ver un poco el ejemplo de París. Después va a haber la mesa redonda sobre bonos verdes. Ya entrando en los productos, vamos a tomar los bonos verdes, la financiación como elemento central, y vamos a tener la oportunidad de escuchar a varios distribuidores y varios emisores en esta mesa redonda. Vamos a acabar la jornada, sea aproximadamente sobre la 1, un poco antes, con la intervención de Stephen Nolan. Stephen Nolan es el responsable, el coordinador de la Red Europea de Centros Financieros que han decidido o están colaborando para desarrollar dentro de sus centros financieros cada vez más los principios y las prácticas de las finanzas sostenibles y de las finanzas verdes. Barcelona, y concretamente Barcelona Centro Financiero Europeo, a quien aprovecho ahora para agradecer una vez más que esta colaboración que tenemos, yo creo que bastante a menudo con el Instituto de Estudios Financieros, pues vamos a tener al coordinador de esta red de centros financieros europeos, a los cuales yo espero que pronto pues estemos ya con la capacidad del Barcelona Centro Financiero de unirse a esta red, repito, muy potente, de centros en los cuales hay una decisión clara tomada y un acuerdo y un apoyo de muchas entidades que pertenecen a este centro para implantar, desarrollar y sobre todo pues hacer cada vez más comunes los principios, como decía, de las finanzas verdes. En principio un programa que repito, el objetivo es que nos ayude a todos a tener las ideas más claras, que sirva un poco de introducción a lo que pensamos hacer en los próximos meses, que es actividades más de fomento de determinados elementos de la Sustainable Finance y de las finanzas verdes. Creo que va a ser una buena entrada y qué mejor que to have this initial presentation of Madame Gray on the action plan. I think she's going to talk for around half an hour, or even less if she likes, and it will be the opportunity, of course, to have questions to her as much as possible. You know that this is simultaneous translation. You can use anyone who wishes the instruments of that. They are outside. Let me just mention that next Tuesday, 20 of November, we'll have another event also here in la Bolsa de Barcelona sobre inversión socialmente responsable 2.0, organizado también por el Observatorio de Divulgación Financiera del Instituto de Estudios Financieros. Yo creo que también es un programa interesante, creo que tenéis una invitación en cada una de las sillas y os invito también pues, a participar y asistir el próximo martes. Sin más, sorry for the long introduction. You have the floor, Madame Drake.
Buenos días. Thank you so much for that introduction and also for your kind words. It is always a pleasure to come to Barcelona, and not only does it not give me, more energy to work, but it is a pleasure actually to do it. So I'd be very happy even to do 6 in one morning next time. So, Ferran, that will be your next challenge when I'm here. So there's no stopping me, because when I see engagement like this, and when I see the thirst for not only the knowledge, but also to make it happen on the ground, then of course we get really regenerated with a lot more energy, and we get more efficiency out of it too. Which, by the way, leads me very nicely into the topic that I'll be talking about today. You might be saying, but why is the Deputy Director General of Environment here talking to us about finance? Maybe this should be maybe it's a mistake, or maybe it should be another DG from the European Commission that should be here. Well, in fact is that when we talk about environment, we cannot just talk about amongst ourselves, and we cannot just say, we need to do something about climate change, we need to do something about energy efficient buildings, we need to do something about clean transport facilities, we need to do something about our biodiversity, we need to do something about our waste and about recycling and about plastics and about the circular economy. And then we just say, okay, they're lovely principles, we put them down into, lovely documents, endorsed by the United Nations, endorsed by the whole world, like the Paris Agreement on climate change, like the Sustainable Development Goals, and then, we're just happy and we all go home and live our normal lives. I think 40 plus years after the environmental acquis, the acquis being the set of rules that we have accumulated over this number of years and which all member states have to implement, and when we then sit down, as we are doing now, and doing a lot of what is called the refit, when you refit your car engine after a while, although nowadays it's more fashionable maybe to just change it, but if you look at the legislation and say, okay, has it been fit for purpose? Has it produced results? Well, sometimes we are happy that things have changed, but sometimes we are quite unhappy. Last Monday I was in Paris and I was invited to a roundtable which is being actually led by the government of the Netherlands and also the OECD. And, we took stock about, what's happening in the water world and water infrastructure around the world, whether we have clean water, whether we have access to water, whether we have water which is free from pollution, whether we have, what are we doing about water leakages and groundwater. And you see, that the situation, and I'm not talking about, countries which we usually associate maybe with slow evolution, but we're talking about the European Union with 40 plus years of water legislation. And we see that, like 23 million people in the European Union still do not have adequate access to water. And we have 50%, we have some countries, like 10 countries in the EU where 50% of their water is still being leaked. In other words, they cannot contain leakages, or where we do not have enough protection for flash flooding. We have been now seeing, because of the climate conditions, that flash flooding has become much more a reality in the cities where we all live, and we think that we're living safely. And, this is not being handled enough, not because they don't care, but maybe because there isn't enough money, there isn't enough infrastructure, or maybe the priorities are wrong. So, what am I doing here talking about finance and the action plan on sustainable finance? It's because it is a dire need, and it's useless that we have environmental rules, and we have the tools to make member states, not be fined, but do the action to make it happen and to protect the environment. But we also have to invest properly. We have to ensure that all that money is sitting there out there, the private world, but also in the public fund world, to be channeled to the good investments. Now, the challenge is this: how do we know that this is really a good green investment, sustainable investment? How do we actually know that we are all acknowledging that this is a good investment? And by the way, the investor would want to know, are we going to get enough and quickly enough return on that investment within a reasonable amount of time? We're not talking about 50 years. It can be within 10. Now, of course, this is the challenge that that I'd like to talk about today. And I think it's not a question that we are not aware anymore. I think one positive thing that's happening is that when you look at the surveys and the public in the European Union, and we survey very, very frequently to see what European citizens are thinking about the work of the European Union and how they perceive to be the best priorities, environment is always topping the list, much more than immigration, for instance, and environmental concerns. So I think that should give a lot of alarm bells to any investor to say, okay, if the population feels safer, if we take into account environmental concerns and risks because of climate change, for instance, because of, lack of access to water or waste management or the circular economy, then I think it is definitely a space not only to watch, but to do something about, and quickly. So, having said this preliminary scene setting, I would say, I think there is no doubt that the European Union wants to retain its leadership on the Sustainable Development Goals, on risk of climate change, not only by signing documents and pushing it through in international fora, but also seeing it through in the implementation on the ground. And I think this is where we gain credibility if we also manage to steer finance, because finance will be always the major enabler of the transition. We talk all the time about transition. Transition has become a very in word. You might have heard this week that one of the words that was inserted in the Oxford English Dictionary was single use. The word single use, because of single-use plastics and because of the action also we are taking, it has become much more of a common word for everyone to use, and it has found its way in the dictionary. I think the other word which has taken another dimension in terms of meaning is transition. And not only because of the transition of the economy towards a more circular economy, a more sustainable economy, but also because of the enabling financial framework going through a transition. And I think this is what I would like to say a few words about. There is a recognition that we need enormous investment to enable this transition to happen. And the transition also has to be in the financial framework and how it is led. So it's useless talking about energy transition, low emission transition, circularity, sustainable development without having an enabling financial framework. At the beginning of this year, I chair a task force within the DG which started to put the synergies together to make our case in DG Environment on what are we going to claim from the next budget of the European Commission as DG Environment to make it happen on the ground. And one of the first things we had to do was, can we establish the needs in each sector? Under waste, under circular economy, under biodiversity, under nature protection, under chemicals, the chemicals industry, for instance, and the protection against harmful chemicals. And when you have to establish the needs, you have to come up with numbers. Now, of course, it's impossible to have exact numbers, but this is the exercise that needs to be done. And more, this is being done. I'll give you a few figures. We have estimated, for instance, that reaching the Sustainable Development Goals, which are the set of 17 goals, which still are not actually quantified in terms of targets, but they are there. Hopefully we can move in the international arena on actually making them a little bit more measurable. But we have come up with some figures here about the requirement of annual investments in sustainable infrastructure. In order to reach those goals, we need about 4.7 to 6.7 trillion euro across the countries, and that is in the European Union. But that is only between now and 2030, by the way, because SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are supposed to be reached by 2030, which is only like 12 years from now. So that's the amount of investment. If we just look at achieving now a very measurable target, which has been established by the European Union on energy and climate policy, and as you know, these targets are contained in international agreements apart from our own legislation, that alone will require 180 billion euros in yearly investments additionally. So obviously, this is already just a taster, but if you look at other areas, infrastructure, energy efficiency in buildings, renewable energies, improved waste and water management, greener transport, and new green technologies, nature conservation and restoration, you can imagine what the figures will be, or maybe you cannot. Maybe like not any one of us can really do, but we know that it's a huge amount of money. What is the good news, I think, is that usually this sort of investments were seen as necessary investments that will not get any better gradient, if you like, of competitiveness in the country or in the economy. We believe that this is not the case. We believe that actually the transition to a sustainable economy and to a more circular economy with protection against risks from climate change, etc., actually will improve the competitiveness gradient. Why? Because it will be a big incentive to bring about innovative technologies. And I think this is where exactly the European Union has an edge. So we believe that it is worth investing into having a large-scale effort to transform our financial framework. It is worth to redirect capital towards sustainable activities, and in so doing, capture the potential for enhancing competitiveness of the EU economy and creating employment. Of course, hopefully, we will also be making the right investment in the required skills in the process. Most of these investments, meaning economically viable investments, will have to be made by companies and will obviously have to be made by private households as well. The good news that we see is that there have been several good developments, positive developments, which one could already observe. For instance, there is already a growing focus on green, sustainable finance, and I think the presence here today and the activities that are happening in a lot of frequency in many countries, both on the financial markets and also on the development of new products, like, for instance, the green bonds that has already been mentioned this morning. The green bonds only have, the global issuance of green bonds, for instance, has increased from 4 billion in 2010, so that's only 8 years ago, to over 120 billion last year. And also the developments and the positive trends in the international political arena, for example, the substantial funding the EU and others have been mobilizing to deliver on climate targets following the Paris Agreement. Also, institutional investors have started revisiting their investment strategies. They are moving away from sectors exposed to potentially stranded assets, for instance, like fossil fuels. There is also a growing realization across the board that environmental, social, and governance considerations need to be part of the equation, need to be factored into investment decisions, and throughout the investment chain as well. Of course, in the European Commission, we have long been sensitive to these observances, these trend observances. We have also had a firm belief that a healthy environment has to go hand in hand with economic growth and jobs, and that it is also an indispensable foundation for sustainable development. Also, it has become clear in recent years that environmental protection has to go hand in hand with financial stability. I mentioned already water-related risks such as the flooding, droughts, stranded assets from biodiversity loss, for instance, in agriculture itself. If we do not, in other words, address these environmental risks, then we threaten the very stability of financial markets themselves. I mentioned the World Economic Forum report on global risks, and this report shows that environmental issues feature high on the list of systemic risks. 8 out of 10 most impactful global risks identified in the 2018, this year's report, are environmental or linked to environmental degradation. So in other words, obviously you are the ones to teach me about risks for sure, but if 8 out of 10 already are linked with environment, I think we have no choice but to factor them seriously in, and we need to make it happen still on the ground. We need to decouple, therefore, our economic growth from environmental degradation. We have to make sure, in other words, that if there is growth, this cannot have a negative impact on the environment, on degrading the biodiversity, for instance, loss, which is very rife in many and very alarming in many areas. We believe that, on the other hand, a healthy environment will spur economic development. There is no successful, durable, and competitive economic model if it is not sustainable. On the other hand, if you address natural capital degradation, we can reduce risks not only to health, but also to the environment. And a long-term economic growth, and as well as political and financial stability, will be on definitely much more firm foundations. The transition to a low-emission, resource-efficient, and circular economy also offers significant investment opportunities. Now, the Action Plan on Sustainable Finance has been mentioned already, and this is the main aim of why I would like to also introduce it, and what is the thinking behind it, and what is the timetable, and how it's looking at the moment. It has become one of our priorities as well, I would say since last year, since 2017. It is part of the bigger initiative of the so-called Capital Markets Union, which aims to better integrate capital markets in the European Union. This is, as you know, one of the areas of integration which has been quite slow-moving, even if the EU is 60-plus years old. But it is the one that has taken the longest to happen. And part of this Capital Markets Union is sustainable finance, which has taken really, I would say, I think it has really reconnected us to citizens, to our citizens, even if this appears to be a subject that not all citizens would be very comfortable to talk about, but they are very in touch and alarmed as well sometimes with the risks going on around them in the environment. Sustainable finance comprises three key aspects which are closely related and need to be addressed simultaneously. The first is we need to mobilize financial resources and orient them more towards environmentally friendly and more sustainable investments. I think this is the obvious first step that needs to happen. Secondly, it's also about embedding environmental and broader sustainability risks into risk management of companies and financial institutions, and making these risks also transparent rather than sort of bypassing it or saying it in different words or even pretending that it's not there. Thirdly, we need to take a longer-term economic view, because if we provide and increase sustainable finance, this would require to actually contextualize it into a longer economic view. In other words, the companies and the financial markets need to, I would say, couch their investments decisions into a longer-term economic view, meaning that policymakers need to provide also smart policy frameworks that allow such long-term decision-making, which is maybe not always has been possible or clear or has been the case in the first place. These are the main considerations at the heart of the Commission's Action Plan on Sustainable Finance, which was adopted earlier this year. In March, it has 10 actions which need to be developed in the next 2 years. But we are moving very fast on its implementation. The first step, one of the actions, which is, I think, quite important to recognize and to learn more about and to put on everybody's radar, is the so-called EU taxonomy. Now, this is a word that, you know, when you hear it, you say, okay, what is this? I mean, it's the language of investors and financial people. But I think everybody needs to put this in their dictionary as well, you know, like single-use plastics. And taxonomy is not a word to be scared of, but it's a word that actually signifies a classification system for sustainable finance. It's in other words, saying, you know, this is what it takes to have this investment categorized, classified as a sustainable finance. In other words, providing clarity on what is green. I think that is what it means, and I think it's quite simple for everybody to assimilate. Why do we say this? Because you might say, but it's obvious. If you are, you know, investing in making investments for water accessibility or water sanitation or protecting water from pollution or microplastics, etc., that is obviously a green investment. Well, it sounds like a green investment, but you might have to make sure that it's ticking the boxes. And I think for an investor who wants return on their capital and wants to make sure that they are not taking unreasonable risks, they need to have some surety and some clarity. We need to, in other words, avoid greenwashing, which has been, I would say, plaguing maybe investors in being scared of actually going into certain so-called green investments. In other words, we need to work on confidence building on sustainable finance. And this is one of the ways of doing it. It's not the only way, but I think it's a way that each one of us needs to get familiar with. And this is what we are working towards, this taxonomy system. It does exist, by the way. Some companies, I know that technical experts at the moment are working very hard on this at the moment, and they already have quite a lot of information from companies who have already been doing it as part of their corporate branding. The question is, how do we extend that to make it more of a general classification system that everybody could recognize outside the corporate world of some corporations? The Commission is also looking into developing an EU green bond standard, which would be linked to this taxonomy and therefore would be transparent, also in order to limit the risks of greenwashing. So, secondly, I'm just mentioning a few actions just to give you an idea of what this action plan is. It's not something that's it's something very practical and hopefully something that could be doable. The other one is since we already have a system that works quite well, and this is the labeling system. Labels work wonders, as you know. Sometimes we have to make sure that the labels are actually reflecting what is actually being contained in that product. And this is what we have done with the EU eco-label framework, for instance, where products are given this label if they have ticked some boxes on how they respect the ecosystem, whether they are recyclable or not, etc. This is a voluntary EU-wide labeling scheme, but it will be now the same philosophy, if you like, and scheme will be also transported into financial products. In other words, there will be a label for sustainable financial products as well. And this is because there's a huge interest from the consumer side to actually know with simple signs and simple signalings that the label actually means for something of like an accreditation, a trusted accreditation system, that it is safe to invest in this particular project. Therefore, it is much more of a product or of an action which is targeted for retail investors to invest their money in sustainable projects. Also, the accounting world has to be involved, and the environmental accounting standards will need to be developed too. It's part of the action plan. So the information on the environmental performance of companies and projects, and also its impact on the financial performance of the company, can be integrated into decision-making within the companies and also by investors. Finally, the Commission will also propose amendments to existing legislation to clarify investor duties themselves. And this duty is to ensure that the asset managers, pension funds, and insurance companies will consider environmental, social, and governance factors and risks in their investment decision process, and they are more transparent towards the end client. Well, I would like to conclude by saying that the EU has traditionally been a standard setter. It has created standards, and I'm sure you are familiar with the different types of standards, whether it was, quality standards for protection or safety of toys or machinery, or quality standards, etc. But it has become a standard setter, obviously taking quite a number of risks and a number of time also to develop them, because of different trends that would have been developed in different parts of the European Union by different corporate cultures, perhaps, or even tastes and certain expectations in a market. But a single internal market means also having harmonized standards. And this has been, met with sometimes quite a lot of resistance, but once they were then set, especially for safety, they have tended to influence international and global standards. obviously, the fact that we have developed or created this tradition or this culture of having a standard shaper rather than a follower means that we can sustain a certain lead by facilitating, for instance, market access, which we should not lose, of course. Regulation, as I said before, under the single market has helped us to meet certain environmental challenges. For instance, you may recall, 10 years ago, we had quite a lot of, it wasn't so much of a celebratory tone when there was the famous REACH directive on chemicals, or for the quality of fuel, for instance. But 10 years down the line, it was 10 years celebrated this year, what you read by the chemical industry itself is actually saying, yes, of course, there are still some bureaucratic delays to be dealt with, but at the end of the day, we are all happier that actually, our products are considered by the public, by the industry, by the users in the production chain to be safe, and not to expose, both the workers and also the general public to certain dangers. And I think that gives much more of a comfort to companies. But it's never an easy road to get there. And I think this will be another such journey, with the difference that the awareness about the risks of climate change, I think, is being lived by many of us every day. So I think it is beneficial at the end of the day to have also safer financial frameworks and products to actually channel the money that is needed for the investment in order to develop the protections and develop the systems and the systemic changes that need to happen in order to protect us better from the risks of having unsustainable projects. There is an appetite out there for green investment products, and it's growing. And much of the work that we are undertaking as a Commission will build on the standards that are already there and that are already being developed around the globe, perhaps, but taking, the best examples that we could build on. Environmental protection, I think, is a prime example of where the European Union, the EU's leadership, will benefit at the end of the day the citizens and businesses alike. The legislation is there. It has been there since the 70s. It has helped to improve the environment, to reduce pollution to air, to water, and to soil. It has also steered and stimulated innovation and also investment in environmental goods and services, generating jobs and businesses opportunities. I don't think it is the moment for us to afford to let this lead slip away from us. So I encourage you to keep engaged, to watch the space, and also to contribute to its good development and implementation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Madam Drake, for this excellent and comprehensive introduction to our conference today. That's excellent. I think we still have no more than 10 minutes for questions. Does anyone wants to start? If not, I will, with a couple of questions. First of all, well, things are more or less okay in the European economy these days, and we can take this opportunity to see how we can improve it and sustainable and green finance is going a little bit in this way. But I don't know what if logically we are entering relatively soon or later, I don't know, in a more depressed cycle. How do you think that a worse situation in the economy could affect this plan, could affect the measures and the actions to implement sustainable green finance? What I mean is that the economy goes not so well as it has been in Europe in the previous years. can affect the plan and the trends towards green finance, or do you think that this is not going to affect? The second question will be, you are an expert on SMEs. You have been working in the European Commission for many years on SMEs. What is the role of SMEs? I mean, it's clear the role of large companies or large financial companies in this issue, but what is the role of SMEs? In which way SMEs can jump into the vehicle, no? to impulse and to develop sustainable green finance?
I cannot have a crystal ball about economic outlooks, but what I can say is that whether the economy will take will be further jump started or will keep on the trend, and as you know, the predictions are that the trend is going in the right direction rather than the wrong one in terms of investment, in terms of growth. I believe that the green finance will no longer be an option. It will be really mandatory to mainstream green finance. And I think we will have no option. If you see, for instance, of how the European Commission tabled its financial perspectives, in other words, the proposal for the budget for post-2020, you will see that we were very happy, actually, in DG Environment, because we did. I mean, our big victory would be when environmental concerns are mainstreamed in our policies. And you'll see that in the proposal that was tabled in May by the European Commission, environment actually and environmental concerns, whether and by the way, it's not only climate change, it's energy efficiency, it's efficient mobility, it's living smart cities, I would say, because we're talking about waste and the circularity, for instance. Even the recent strategy on the bioeconomy, for instance, we were very happy because all of these issues have been mainstreamed in our policies, and I think that is the biggest, if you like, assurance or insurance that we are definitely not well catered for, but definitely we have mainstreamed that environmental spending has to go hand in hand with growth. And I think this is the key link that maybe in the past, this is why I started my quite long introduction with saying, what am I doing here talking about finance when I'm, coming from DG Environment? And I think it's already giving a message that we, together with, of course, the leaders of this project on the sustainable finance, which is the FISMA people, the DG FISMA, the Financial Services DG, they have seen that this is mainstreamed, and I think that's a big message that not only in the Commission we have to show the signal for our colleagues or the colleagues in the DG. I mean, I just mentioned one example, and that is agriculture. Now, agriculture and environment people don't really get on very well. Let's say that they don't see eye to eye immediately. They have to work towards it. But you see that even the way that the European Commission is trying to steer the common agricultural policy is to actually make it dependent on performance, and not performance only on production. It means also performing on certain environmental criteria that need to be respected as well by the farmer in order to get the financial contributions from the budget. I think that is, to us internally in the Commission, but I think also to the outside world, that we have to factor in environmental and green investments as the mainstream of the growth. And of course, nobody wants anything except for economic growth and to have jobs and future and a secure future for not only for our planet, but also for the citizens who have to provide the work. So I think this is a signal, I think, that even if the economic downturn happens, which we are not seeing that it should happen in the next few years, we believe that green investment is going to be still a mainstream investment that needs to be taken not only seriously but actually be seen to be implemented. SMEs are, as usual, we always said this a million times, backbone of the economy. And again, we have to mean it. Now, of course, SMEs are usually the ones where innovation starts, where new products, where new services are brought onto the market and then work themselves into the production chain and change traditional production chains because of innovation. Of course, for this, they would need financing. They would need scaling up of their sometimes small innovation, but with big impacts once they are grown. And there, again, in the financial perspectives and the budget proposal that the Commission put forward, there is not only good news, I would say there is a key indicator there that a single instrument that the Commission is proposing is geared towards being accessible to small and medium-sized enterprises, of course, with also the participation of private investment. Why? Because I think the effect of the European Union on SMEs, the main effect is not how much money is available only, but also having the leverage effect with the banks, with the investors, in order to actually scale up the innovations that usually make the bigger impacts once these SMEs are trusted, are seen to be credible, and hopefully seen to be, therefore, eligible to have this label, the greening label, as signals for investors. So I think this action plan for sustainable finance will also be helping SMEs a lot in order to help themselves to get access to finance, which will always remain the key challenge for small and medium-sized enterprises.
Thanks very much. One last question. I don't know, Luis or anybody? Anybody wants to make it? Oh, yes, okay.
Just a quick question. You have mentioned, what would be your view on which would be the optimum balance between voluntary measures and regulatory compulsory measures to make this sustainable finance mainstream? Because you have mentioned that the label is going to be voluntary, but you also mentioned that the transparency, for example, for funds on how they integrate ESG, we have the directive for information to shareholders. This is going to be regulatory and compulsory. So which would be the optimum mix between voluntary and compliance?
Voluntary can work, as you know, but in my view, it always has had very limited impact. And if we're looking for major impact, like we're having here, we're trying to seek here, because it's quite also fast, it needs to be seen very fast. I believe that there has to be much more emphasis, I think, on the regulatory parts, if there is the appetite, and there seems to be the right appetite and the right climate in the member states, which will, at the end of the day, decide whether, how much the balance between voluntary and compulsory should be. But I think it seems that it is more veering towards having more regulation and, of course, space for voluntary to go further.
Thank you very much, Madam Drake. As a matter of fact, Mr. Tarradellas, which I take the opportunity to thanks also to you for to be so kind to be intermediate in that possibility to have Madam Drake here, is giving advice that 10 o'clock is 10 o'clock and you have to go. It's right 10 o'clock, then it's fantastic. Thank you very much again, Mrs. Drake, from all of us, and good luck in the rest of your day, and don't get too tired. Thank you.